My name is Wendy Vale, 33 years old. I woke to the soft, antiseptic hush of the ward, the IV line tugging at the inside of my elbow like a gentle leash reminding me to be small, to be careful. The curtain around my bed floated when the vent kicked on, and beyond it I could hear a nurse laughing at something a doctor said in a voice too low to catch. Everyday life, moving around me as if I were a stone in a river. 3 days in the hospital had been a lifetime. I wanted my own sheets, the way they hold your shape, the way your house smells like the life you built inside it. Dallas had been there when I first surfaced, his palms around mine, forehead pressed to my knuckles. "I thought we lost you," he whispered, and grief tightened his words until they almost broke. I remember thinking, so foolishly, that fear had rinsed him clean and left only love behind. He visited daily after that with flowers, glossy magazines, and updates about clients who trusted him with their futures. He did that thing he does, easy charm like a warm lamp, until the room felt safer simply because he was in it. I clung to that light, even when it flickered. By day 2, the flicker was brighter. By day 3, it had a shadow. He was still sweet, still careful, but distracted in a way I could feel more than see, like a draft through a closed window. When I asked about an elderly client who sent us cookies, he smiled a beat too late. When I joked about him living on cereal while I was away, he squeezed my fingers and promised he'd survive, but his eyes went to the door as if some portion of him had somewhere else to be. Cynthia arrived that afternoon in a blur of perfume and chaos, a box of fancy chocolates under her arm and the truth on her tongue. "You look terrible," she said, which made me laugh and then wince because ribs don't like laughter. We talked for hours, her latest dating misfire, the petty dramas of our neighborhood, the comfort of dumb stories filling up the spaces we didn't want to name. She left me with a kiss on the forehead and a promise to call, and the room felt emptier without her noise. That night, when the monitors quieted and the corridor dimmed, I phoned Dallas to tell him I might be discharged early. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. He forgets to charge, I told myself. He leaves his phone on mute. He takes long showers. I lined up sensible explanations like dominoes and refused to breathe on them. Morning brought Dr. Patel and the magic words. "You can go home. No driving, no heavy lifting, take it slow." I said yes to all of it just to get out. A taxi ferried me through streets I knew by heart, the trees rinsed clean by last night's rain, the front lawns trimmed into good behavior. Our two-story with the blue shutters waited like a photograph of a life that used to fit me perfectly. Dallas's car wasn't in the drive. Fine. Work. People still need advice at 10 a.m. I told the driver I could manage my bag because I hate looking frail in front of strangers, and climbed the porch steps with caution disguised as poise. The key slid in like muscle memory. The lock answered with a sleepy click. I breathed in and paused. Vanilla. Not the sharp kind that smells like cake mix, but a rounded, expensive version that put a gloss over the air. And beneath it, something floral I didn't own. I prefer clean scents, eucalyptus, lavender, the occasional pine candle in December. This was glamorous and deliberate. My hospital bag thumped to the entry rug, sounding louder than it should. The house was warmer, not temperature warm. Lived in warm, like a room you just left and planned to come back to. Voices reached me from upstairs, softened by walls and comfort by a laugh I did not know. A woman's laugh, light, bell clear, and then Dallas's answer, lower, a rumble I knew better than my own heartbeat. For a beautiful, treacherous second, I thought Cynthia had come back to surprise me, and Dallas had ducked home from work to greet us both. But Cynthia's laugh arrives in the world like fireworks. This one was silk. I climbed, careful of the ache in my ribs. The stairs creaked in the pattern I've heard 1,000 times, but today each sound felt like a countdown. 9, 8, 7. Our bedroom door was not closed. It was ajar in the way of a mouth preparing to lie. Through the seam, movement on the wall, two shadows layering into one. My palm found the door and pushed. What followed is a series of still photographs I will never stop seeing. Dallas's back, familiar as a language I learned before school, strands of auburn hair on our pillow, a body arranged under him with the confidence of repetition, hands in his hair, his hands on her hips, the rhythm of people who had done this more than once and would do it again. Perfume turned air into syrup. I stood there long enough for jealousy to become grief, and grief to become something colder, something so clean it didn't even sting. No one saw me. She was lost in pleasure, and he was lost in her, and I was not in the room at all. I stepped back the way you do when you knock over a glass and somehow catch it before it shatters. The hall swayed. The banister was a rope I gripped to keep from falling. The old framed photo of us at a lake, sun-blind, laughing, hung crooked, as if even the house couldn't keep pretending. Downstairs, air felt different, less sweet. I slipped outside and sat on the curb as if I'd come out to watch an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary neighborhood where Mrs. Jenkins waters impatience like they are holy, and the kid next door practices the same 4 notes on a trumpet until mercy should arrive. My body shook like I was cold, though the sun warmed my face. I cataloged sensations because thoughts were knives: the grit of concrete, the distant electric hum of a mower, the taste of disinfectant still ghosting my tongue. 10 minutes passed, or 20. Time bent. The front door opened. They emerged in a halo of that perfume I would recognize for the rest of my life. She was movie beautiful. Porcelain skin, that hair, a dress that knew how to be seen. She kissed him on our porch with a confidence I envied for a breath and loathed for the rest. He looked happy in a way I had not managed to make him in months. The observation lodged like a splinter. When they were gone, she in a red sedan, he back inside, I stood, wiped grit from my palms onto my jeans, and walked up our driveway, on legs I did not entirely trust. The key turned. The entry swallowed me again. I set my face in the shape of homecoming and called, lightly, "I'm home." He came to the landing with panic splashing across his face before the smile reset everything. "Wendy, you're back early. They were keeping you. Tomorrow, right?" Change of plans. I smiled. It felt like wearing someone else's mouth. Doctor said I could sleep in my own bed. He flew down the stairs, and when he hugged me, I recognized a scent I would never again forget. When his mouth brushed my temple, I tasted the sweetness of another woman's lipstick turned faint and metallic. "How are you feeling, Chamna?" he asked, and urgent concern vibrated the words like a plucked string. "Tired," I said. "Grateful." He offered dinner. Thai from my favorite place, because of course he did. He is deft with gestures, a maestro of appearances. I nodded, and he busied himself with menus as if they were shields. We spoke of small things arranged like props: the nurse who braided my hair, the neighbor's garbage thief conspiracy, a client's portfolio doing whatever portfolios do to keep the story moving. He laughed at Mrs. Jenkins and her paranoia about the mailman reading her magazines. "Maybe he is," I said. "Maybe everyone reads what doesn't belong to them around here." Something in him flinched. A half second. The kind of minute till you only notice when you've started counting breath by breath. He vanished to the kitchen and returned with a small wrapped box that caught the light as if it wanted to be forgiven for arriving when it did. Inside, a delicate silver bracelet, my birthstone beating its own little pulse. "A welcome home present," he said. "You scared me." On any other day, I would have cried for the sweetness. Today, I slid it onto my wrist and thought about guilt shopping. I thought about the heat of his hands on her skin and the ease with which he held both truths without dropping either. Night came. We moved toward each other with care because the hospital still lived in my bones. If I didn't know, it would have been tender. If I didn't know, I would have closed my eyes and called it healing. But I did know. Every kiss carried a second ghosted underneath it. Every whisper sounded practiced. When he slept with his arm across my waist like a vow, I stared at the dark ceiling and counted backward from 100 until the numbers made sense again. I could have screamed. I could have torn the room apart and thrown shards of our life at his sleeping face. But rage is a flare, bright, fast, and over. What I needed now was a lantern. Morning. He left for work at the usual time, kissed my cheek, told me to call if I felt faint or lonely, or anything at all. I watched his car disappear, then made coffee steady enough to stop my hands from trembling. I did not ransack drawers or sniff at sheets like an amateur in a bad movie. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a pad and made a neat list like a woman planning a party. Auburn hair, expensive perfume, vanilla candles I would never buy, a red sedan, a key in my front door that was not mine. I drew a small square on the page and wrote our bedroom inside it. Then I drew a circle around the square and another around that. My life had been the square. I was going to learn the circles. The house hummed its old familiar tune. Somewhere on the block, a dog barked, like a metronome counting time. The bracelet lay cool against my pulse. I lifted my pen and began the first line of the investigation that would end the life I knew and build another out of the pieces. The bracelet clinked softly against my coffee cup as I lifted it, a delicate chime that sounded nothing like the thunder rolling inside my chest. Silver with my birthstone, a piece meant to symbolize care, devotion, maybe even guilt disguised as love. Dallas had fastened it around my wrist himself, his fingers warm and steady. A gesture for a woman he thought still belonged to him. A gift meant to soothe. Instead, it burned like evidence. I stared at it now, in the pale morning light of our kitchen, and imagined it whispering secrets. A token not of love, but of theater. And I realized something important. If he could act, then so could I. When Dallas came home that evening, he was humming. He smelled faintly of cologne, layered over something sharper, like perfume trying to escape its cage. He leaned down to kiss my forehead, his lips warm but foreign, and his eyes scanned my face with that faux concern he'd perfected. "You look better already," he said, pulling his tie loose. "I've been worried all day." I smiled, soft, as if warmed by the words. "You always worry?" We sat across from each other at the table while Thai takeout steamed between us, the familiar scents of lemongrass and chili curling upward. He asked about my day, his questions measured, rehearsed. I told him about the quiet, about flipping through magazines, about how Mrs. Jenkins cornered me outside to complain about another trash thief. He laughed, maybe too easily. I watched the lines of his mouth shift, his teeth flash, and wondered what lies he was chewing with his food. Between bites, I tested him. "It's strange," I said, placing my chopsticks down carefully. "This house smelled different when I first got back yesterday, like someone had been burning candles." Dallas paused, just a flicker, then he chuckled. "I lit one of those sample candles we got in the mail. Thought it'd make the place feel cozy before you came home." "Clever. Quick. Too quick." "Vanilla, right?" I asked, voice steady. His eyes darted up, quick as lightning, before settling into something softer. "Yeah, vanilla. Didn't like it much." I leaned back, nodded. "Neither do I." Silence stretched, thin as a hair. He broke it by reaching for my hand across the table, brushing his thumb over the bracelet he'd given me. "I missed you, Wendy. I don't think I could have handled another day without you here." The words should have made me melt. They once would have. Now they curdled in my stomach, sour. But I squeezed his hand, played my part. "I missed you too." Later, while he showered, I stood in our bedroom and stared at the bed. The sheets had been changed, the pillows plumped, our comforter folded with care. But no matter how clean it looked, I could still see them. Her auburn hair like fire against our white sheets, his body pressed close, the rhythm I'd once thought was ours alone. I gripped the mattress until my nails bit through the fabric. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage. And I wasn't just a wife. I was the audience, the critic, and soon, the director. When he slipped into bed beside me, he curled his arm around my waist, gentle, as if guarding me. I listened to his breath slow, his body grow heavy with sleep. The weight of him felt like chains, yet his warmth reminded me of a time when I believed it was protection. I didn't sleep. I mapped my next moves instead. The following morning, Dallas left at his usual time, briefcase in hand, a kiss brushed against my cheek like punctuation at the end of a lie. I waited for the sound of his car to fade before moving. My steps were deliberate, my body sore but fueled by something sharper than pain. I went to his office, the small one tucked off the living room, where he handled client files, investment portfolios, and secrets he thought I'd never touch. His laptop gleamed on the desk, closed but not locked away. I sat, fingers hovering. Password protected. Of course. Dallas prided himself on being clever, but clever men often recycle the very things they think make them special. Birthdays, anniversaries, dog names. It took me 3 tries. The password? Wendy0515. Our wedding date, stitched with my name. I almost laughed. He had used me as the key to his betrayal. The screen blinked alive. I opened his email first. Clean. Too clean. Deleted threads. Nothing unusual in the inbox. But when I clicked his browser history, my breath caught. Real estate websites. Apartment listings downtown. Divorce law articles, bookmarked and revisited. Questions about alimony, asset division, offshore accounts. My stomach churned, but my hands remained steady. I printed pages, page after page, the printer whirring like a machine recording crimes. Each sheet I tucked into a book I kept on the shelf, a novel Dallas would never read. The irony wasn't lost on me. This wasn't about a fling, it was a strategy. He wasn't just betraying me in bed, he was preparing to erase me from the life we'd built, one calculated step at a time. I closed the laptop, wiped my fingerprints from the desk, and sat back in the chair, staring at the walls lined with framed certificates, proof of his trustworthiness, his expertise. I wondered how many of his clients would still call him reliable if they knew what I had just uncovered. The bracelet glimmered on my wrist, catching the desk lamp's light. I twisted it until it dug into my skin, reminding me this wasn't grief anymore. This was evidence. By the time Dallas came home that evening, I was sitting on the couch with a book open, a glass of wine in my hand, and a smile that looked convincing enough to fool a man who wanted to be fooled. He leaned down to kiss me, and I let him, cataloging every detail. The faint smell of her perfume clinging to his shirt, the way his eyes flickered when I asked if his day had been busy. "Oh, he said lightly, kicking off his shoes. Just the usual clients, nothing exciting." Nothing exciting. My husband was plotting to divorce me, steal what we'd built, and run into another woman's arms. And yet he sat beside me, feet up on the coffee table, like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. Because I knew, and knowledge was no longer a burden, it was a weapon. The morning after my quiet discovery in his office, the world seemed unnervingly normal. The neighborhood kids shrieked as they waited for the school bus, a dog barked 2 houses down, and the mail carrier trudged past our driveway. Everything was familiar, yet none of it belonged to me anymore. My life had been cracked open, and the pieces still looked the same on the outside, but inside they had shifted into something unrecognizable. I poured myself coffee, the bitter scent filling the kitchen, and laid out the printed papers I'd hidden the night before. Dallas's browser history, divorce law searches, apartment listings, all laid in a neat row across the table like cards in a cruel game. My eyes kept returning to the same phrase on one of the pages, adultery and alimony consequences. The words stared back at me, heavy with implication. So not only was he sleeping with someone else, he was preparing the legal terrain to ensure he walked away untouched. He wanted the upper hand. He wanted me erased. I traced my finger along the rim of my coffee mug and whispered aloud to the empty kitchen, "Not yet, Dallas, not yet." When he came home that evening, he was flush with charm. He spun stories about a client's retirement fund, about how proud he was that I was healing quickly. He asked if I'd rested. He even rubbed my shoulders with the tenderness of a man who might still deserve the title of husband. I smiled and leaned into the touch, but every muscle in my body went rigid beneath his hands. His tenderness was nothing more than camouflage. That night, when his breathing slowed beside me, I stared at the ceiling fan, slicing the darkness into fragments, and thought, I need to know who she is. The next day, I made my move. Dallas left for work, briefcase in hand, a kiss on my temple like punctuation at the end of his deception. I gave it 5 minutes, then walked back into his office. The laptop's glow lit my face again, cold and unforgiving. This time, I went deeper. His main email account had been scrubbed, but when I dug into his calendar, I noticed odd blank spaces. Dallas was meticulous about scheduling client meetings, meticulous to the point of obsession. Empty gaps of 3, sometimes 4 hours, didn't fit. I opened the desk drawers, receipts tucked into folders, papers stacked with accountant-like precision. And then, tucked beneath a pile of tax documents, a handwritten note folded small. Victoria, 5th Street, 2 p.m., don't forget. My throat tightened. A name, a time, a place. The kind of slip men make when they're arrogant enough to believe their secrets are safe. Victoria. I folded the note back and placed it exactly as I'd found it. Then I opened his desk calendar and circled the time slot. If he thought he could erase me from his life, I would write myself back into the margins. At 1 o'clock, I parked 2 blocks away from 5th Street, ribs aching from the walk, but determination steadying me. I found a cafe with a clean line of sight to the boutique storefront the note had mentioned. A golden sign read, Blake's. Expensive clothing draped elegantly in the window, mannequins styled in outfits meant to intimidate with their price tags. And there she was. The woman I'd glimpsed only as auburn hair tangled in my sheets now stood under the boutique's awning, radiant even in the ordinary light of day. She moved with an ease that made people turn their heads, smile when she smiled. Customers trickled in, and she greeted each with warmth that felt rehearsed yet irresistible. My stomach clenched, a strange cocktail of rage and reluctant awe. She was beautiful and clever. She knew how to make people feel seen, wanted. I understood instantly why Dallas had fallen, but what I couldn't forgive was that he had chosen to give her what he was supposed to protect for me. For an hour I watched, noting details like a detective. Red sedan parked at the curb, designer shoes too new for someone running a small shop, a confidence that hinted at practice. She wasn't surviving off this boutique. This boutique was a stage, a cover for something larger. And then, as if the universe wanted to punctuate my suspicion, she locked up early. My pulse spiked. I slid low in my seat as she crossed the street toward the parking garage. Minutes later, the red sedan pulled out. I started my car and followed at a careful distance. Through downtown traffic, I trailed her until she stopped at a quiet cafe on the far side of the city. She walked inside. Moments later, a man in his 50s joined her. Expensive suit, thinning gray hair, confidence in every step. He kissed her cheek as if it were his right. My nails dug into the steering wheel. Dallas wasn't the only one. I snapped photos with my phone, each click loud in my ears, though no one else noticed. She leaned close to the man, whispered things that made him smile like he was 20 years younger. His hand brushed hers across the table, and she didn't pull away. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. The body language told the story. This wasn't business. It was intimacy. It was betrayal multiplied. Dallas thought he was building a future with her. He wasn't. He was just one of many men caught in her web. My heart thudded in a rhythm of fury and revelation. She wasn't only his mistress. She was a predator. When she left the cafe with the older man, slipping into his car this time instead of her own, I didn't follow. I had enough for today. Enough to know that my husband's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was part of something bigger, something darker. Driving home, the city blurred past me, but my focus sharpened into a single line of thought. If Dallas wanted to erase me, he had no idea I was already drawing the outline of his downfall. I pulled into our driveway just as the evening sun dipped behind the rooftops. Dallas's car was already there. He was home. And when I stepped through the door, the smell of Thai takeout greeted me again, warm and inviting. Perfect timing, he said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with a smile. I thought we could eat before you got too tired. I smiled back, steady, practiced. That sounds wonderful. Inside, I was already scripting his destruction. Dallas sat across from me at the dinner table, chopsticks poised with practiced ease. The warm scent of noodles and basil drifted between us, disguising the poison of lies that hung thicker than steam. He spoke of trivial things, the Johnsons' retirement fund, traffic downtown, a new Thai dish he thought I'd like. His voice was smooth, steady, the same voice that had once coaxed me into believing he was safe harbor. But every word was a mask. I knew it. And worse, he didn't know that I knew. I watched him chew, swallow, sip his wine, laugh at his own anecdotes. He leaned forward, brushed my hand, eyes full of counterfeit tenderness. "You're so quiet tonight," he said, almost gently. I tilted my head, pretending to blush at his attention. "Just tired," I murmured. The hospital drained me. He nodded sympathetically, though a flicker, barely visible, crossed his eyes. A flicker of relief. Relief that I was still the trusting wife. Relief that his secret world was safe. The bracelet on my wrist caught the light as I lifted my glass. I let it sparkle, let it glint like truth hiding in plain sight. And in my chest, the first outlines of a plan began to form, precise and cold. That night, while Dallas snored softly beside me, I replayed every second I had witnessed earlier that day. The auburn-haired woman, her boutique, her smile aimed like a weapon at every customer, and then the older man whose hand lingered too long on hers. I remembered the way she laughed at him, the same way she must have laughed upstairs in my bed, and bile burned the back of my throat. She wasn't a secret fling. She was deliberate, calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing. The next morning, I feigned a headache to keep Dallas from hovering. He kissed my forehead with that same mix of charm and guilt, whispered for me to rest, and left with his briefcase. The sound of his car fading down the street was the permission I needed. I dressed quickly, dark jeans, a plain sweater, and drove downtown. I parked across from the boutique, slid on sunglasses, and waited. Through the broad windows, I watched her in her natural habitat. She floated through her shop like a queen surveying her kingdom, arranging scarves with delicate fingers, leaning close to customers, laughing just enough to make them feel special. Each person who entered seemed to leave lighter in spirit and lighter in wallet. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She had presence, confidence that bordered on performance. I wondered how many men she had already trained to orbit her glow. I sat in my car for hours, taking notes like a student cramming for an exam. Patterns emerged. She checked her phone often, her lips curving into secretive smiles before she slipped it back into her pocket. She disappeared into the back room every so often, re-emerging with a fresh sheen of perfume, her auburn hair smoothed into perfection. And always, always, her eyes flicked to the door like she was waiting for someone. At 5 o'clock sharp, she locked the boutique and stepped into the evening air. My pulse raced. The red sedan I'd memorized rumbled to life, and I followed, 2 cars back. She drove with assurance, weaving through traffic like the city belonged to her. I kept my distance, fingers clenched white on the steering wheel. Every turn she took felt like a thread pulling me deeper into her web. Finally, she parked outside a small cafe I didn't recognize. She slipped inside, and I positioned myself at a table across the street. Through the window, I saw him, the older man from before, already waiting with a drink in hand. He rose when she entered, kissed her cheek, and pulled out her chair with the gallantry of a man still desperate to impress. I snapped photo after photo with my phone. Each frame was a nail in the coffin of my marriage. Each captured glance, each touch, each smile. It was all evidence. But what chilled me wasn't the affair itself. It was the way she leaned in, her hand brushing his arm with a practiced ease, the way her eyes locked onto his as if he were the only man alive. It was the same look I had once believed was mine from Dallas, and now it was his, and maybe countless others before. This woman wasn't just my husband's mistress. She was a predator of opportunity, moving from one man to the next, feeding off their desire to feel needed, important. Dallas wasn't her first. He wouldn't be her last. When they left together, his arm at her waist, I stayed in my seat, trembling from the inside out. My world had already shattered once. Tonight, I realized it wasn't just betrayal. It was entanglement in something much bigger, much darker. By the time I returned home, the city was blanketed in night. Dallas was already there, the TV humming, with some sports game, his smile soft and eager when I walked in. "You look pale," he said. "Did you rest today?" I nodded, my lips stretching into something that resembled a smile. "I did. Just tired again." He rose, kissed the top of my head, and offered to make tea. I let him. I sat at the table where I'd spread his printed lies, and I stared at his back as he fussed with the kettle. The truth was clear now. My husband was not just a cheater. He was prey, and the woman he thought was his future was nothing more than a wolf circling both of us. As the kettle whistled and Dallas poured the steaming water, my decision hardened. I wasn't just going to survive this. I wasn't going to let them take everything I'd built. I was going to watch. I was going to learn. And then, when the time was right, I was going to strike. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, striping the bedroom in gold. Dallas stirred beside me, stretched, and kissed my shoulder as though we were still the couple we used to be. His touch was tender, but to me, it felt like an intrusion, an actor forgetting his lines mid-play. I murmured a sleepy, "Good morning," all the while planning my next move. After he left, briefcase in hand and lips pressed to my temple, I lingered at the window, watching his car shrink down the street. My reflection in the glass didn't look like me anymore. My eyes were sharper, harder. This wasn't grief softening into acceptance. This was rage sharpening into purpose. I needed to know more. Not just her name, not just her boutique, but the full truth of what kind of woman could weave a man like Dallas into her tapestry. So I dressed in neutral tones, tied my hair back, and returned to Blake's boutique. The bell over the door chimed as I slipped inside. The air was thick with that same expensive perfume, floral, intoxicating, invasive. Clothes hung like works of art, arranged with such care it made you believe they mattered. Behind the counter, she was radiant. Victoria Blake, her auburn hair gleamed under the soft lights, and her smile spread like a practiced spell across her face. "Welcome," she said warmly, unaware that I was the shadow of her sins. I nodded, pretending to browse through silk blouses and dresses that cost more than a month's mortgage. Each thread I touched was another reminder of the money fueling her lifestyle, money siphoned from my marriage, maybe even from Dallas's clients. A pair of young women entered, giggling, and Victoria swooped in to charm them. I watched closely. She complimented their choices, laughed with just the right volume, brushed their arms lightly as she led them to the mirror. It wasn't just selling, it was seduction. She sold the idea of being seen, of being adored. I stepped back outside before she could notice me staring too long. Through the glass, I saw her take a call, her smile faltering for a flicker, then returning brighter than ever. A mask repaired in seconds. That evening, I followed her again. This time, she drove not to the cafe, but to a high-end restaurant where men in suits held open doors and women in diamonds clinked glasses. I parked across the street, heart hammering. Through the tall windows, I saw him, the same older man. His posture radiated wealth and entitlement, his suit tailored with surgical precision. He stood when she arrived, kissed her cheek, and placed his hand on the small of her back as if to announce possession. They dined together for over an hour, leaning close, their heads nearly touching. I watched, unseen, documenting every stolen glance and lingering touch. And when he kissed her hand before she left, I knew with absolute certainty Dallas was not her only mark. This wasn't an affair, this was a scheme. Back home, I locked myself in the bathroom, sat on the cool tile floor, and scrolled through the photos I'd taken. Victoria's smile tilted toward one man, then another. Dallas's world wasn't just crumbling under betrayal. He was entangled in a web spun by a woman who lived on deception. When I finally emerged, Dallas was on the couch, remote in hand, a picture of domestic calm. "Hey," he said softly. "I thought maybe we could watch something together. You pick." I sank beside him, forced a smile, and let my body lean against his. He wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close as if he could shield me from the very storm he had dragged into my life. But as the TV flickered before us, my mind wasn't on the screen. It was on Victoria Blake, her red sedan, her boutique, her older lover, and the sick realization that Dallas wasn't the architect of this betrayal. He was just another pawn on her board. And I decided then, if she thought she could play this game unchecked, she had no idea who she had invited to the table. Friday night, the house was unnervingly quiet. Dallas had packed a small suitcase earlier that afternoon, claiming he was driving to a conference 2 hours away. He kissed me goodbye, his lips soft against my forehead, and promised to call once he checked into his hotel. He didn't know that I already knew, that his conference was nothing but camouflage, another carefully chosen lie to buy him a weekend of stolen hours. As his taillights disappeared down the street, I felt the stillness in the air shift. The stage was mine now. An hour later, headlights swept across the driveway. Cynthia's car. She stepped out carrying a bottle of wine and the kind of nervous energy that buzzed in her voice before she even spoke. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as I pulled her inside. I nodded, locking the door behind us. "If I want answers, I need to see what's on his work computer. I can't risk him erasing everything here." She set the wine on the counter with a thud. "Breaking into your husband's office isn't exactly legal." "It's not breaking in if I have a key card," I replied, pulling the small piece of plastic from my wallet. Dallas had given it to me years ago in case of emergencies. He never imagined I'd define emergency this way. Cynthia stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, but if we get caught, you're explaining it to the cops." The drive downtown was silent except for the low hum of the engine and the pounding of my heart. We parked in the nearly empty garage beneath Dallas's office building, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly. My palms were damp as I slid the keycard into the reader. A soft beep, then the lock clicked open. Inside, the building was dark, the air heavy with the scent of dust and carpet cleaner. Cynthia trailed close behind as I led us to Dallas's suite. Griffin Financial Services. His name glimmered in gold letters across frosted glass, a cruel reminder of the trust people placed in him. "Ready?" I whispered. "No," she muttered, "but let's do it anyway." The office door opened with another swipe of the card. The waiting area was ghostly, chairs aligned like obedient soldiers. We slipped past them into his private office, my pulse racing as I settled into his chair. The laptop was waiting. I keyed in his password, my name, and our anniversary. Always my name, always our date. The irony twisted my stomach. The desktop bloomed with files, spreadsheets, bank transfers, client folders. Cynthia hovered over my shoulder, her breath sharp. "Find something," she whispered. It didn't take long. Within minutes, I was scrolling through transactions that didn't belong. Small amounts skimmed here, unusual transfers there. A pattern emerged. Money siphoned from clients into shell companies, then redirected into accounts tied to Blake's boutique. My chest tightened. He's not just cheating, he's stealing. Cynthia leaned closer. "How much?" I ran a quick calculation, my fingers trembling. At least 200,000, maybe more. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Jesus, Wendy." The deeper I dug, the worse it became. Elderly clients, middle-class families, all of them had trusted him, and he had carved pieces out of their savings like a butcher. For her. For Victoria Blake. I printed page after page, the whir of the printer echoing like a siren in the silence. Each sheet was proof. Each sheet was betrayal etched in ink. And then, in the drafts folder of his email, I found it. A message to Victoria, dated 3 days ago. I can't keep doing this much longer. Wendy's getting suspicious, and the audit is next month. We need to move up our timeline. The divorce papers are ready. Most of the assets are already in the offshore account. We can disappear to Costa Rica before the month ends if everything goes right. I love you. The words swam on the screen, each one a blade. Divorce papers, offshore accounts, disappearance. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to take everything. Cynthia read over my shoulder, her voice sharp with disbelief. "He's going to run away with her? He's going to steal your life?" I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "Not if I stop him first." I copied the email onto a flash drive, along with every damning document I could find. My hands shook, but my mind was clear, cold. He thought he had the perfect plan. He thought he was clever enough to vanish into paradise with his mistress. But now I had his blueprint, and blueprints can be rewritten. When we finally slipped back out of the building, the night air felt heavier, pressing against my skin. Cynthia gripped my arm. "Wendy, this is dangerous. You're talking about going up against both of them." "I'm not just going up against them," I said, sliding into the passenger seat. "I'm going to dismantle them, piece by piece." As we drove home, the flash drive weighed heavy in my pocket, hotter than fire, sharper than glass. My marriage wasn't just broken, it was a crime scene. And now I was holding the evidence. The morning after our break-in, I woke to the sound of birds outside the window, their songs sharp and almost mocking. Dallas was already gone, his side of the bed cold, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the sheets like an unwelcome guest. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the words from his unsent email. Divorce papers, offshore accounts, Costa Rica. The fantasy life he'd scripted with her was so vivid, so meticulously arranged, that I could almost picture it. Him lounging under foreign skies with Victoria, the woman who had stolen not just his heart, but the very marrow of our future. But he hadn't counted on me finding the script. He hadn't counted on me stealing the ending. That evening, when he walked through the door, I was waiting in the living room, every lamp lit. The documents and printouts I'd gathered sat in a neat stack on the coffee table. The bracelet he'd given me glittered on my wrist, a reminder of the lie he thought was still intact. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, loosening his tie, his smile automatic. "You look serious. Everything okay?" I gestured toward the stack of papers. "We need to talk." He froze, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. His eyes flicked to the papers, then back to me, his expression carefully blank. "What's all this?" "Evidence," I said evenly, "of your affair, of the money you've stolen, of your plans to leave me for her." The color drained from his face. "Wendy, Don't, I cut in, my voice sharp enough to slice through the room. I've seen the transfers. I've read the draft email. Costa Rica, Dallas, offshore accounts. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? He sank onto the couch, his hands trembling as he pressed them to his face. Oh, God. I let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. When he finally looked up, his eyes were rimmed red. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought... His words collapsed under their own weight. You thought you could build a new life with her, I finished for him. You thought you could erase me, erase us, and take everything with you. He opened his mouth, but I leaned forward, my voice low, deliberate. I'm not here for excuses. I'm here to give you a choice. His brows knit, confusion flickering across his face. A choice? Yes. I slid the stack of papers closer to him. Option 1. You confess. You turn yourself in, admit to the embezzlement, the affair, all of it. You face prison like a man, and maybe, you salvage a shred of dignity. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. And option 2? Option 2, I said slowly, is that you stick to your plan. You run away with Victoria. You disappear to Costa Rica and pray that she doesn't betray you the way you betrayed me. He blinked at me, stunned. You're serious. Deadly. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not the fear of being caught, but the fear of being unmasked, stripped bare. His hands shook as he rifled through the papers, scanning the damning details. His lips parted when he reached the draft email. You weren't supposed to see this. No, I said. I wasn't supposed to know any of it. I was supposed to stay ignorant, smiling at your lies while you gutted our marriage. But I'm not ignorant anymore, and you're out of time. He pressed his palms to his temples, rocking slightly. She loves me, he whispered, almost to himself. We were building something real. She's playing you, I snapped. You're not her future, Dallas. You're her funding. His eyes snapped up to mine, wounded, desperate. You're lying. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope I'd prepared. Inside were the photos I'd taken. Victoria with the older man at the cafe, his hand lingering on hers, their bodies angled too close to be business. I tossed the photos onto the table. They scattered like sharp leaves, each one a blade cutting deeper into him. She has another lover, I said flatly. Richard Hawthorne, wealthy, married, and just as fooled as you. Dallas stared at the photos, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, grief, and finally a hollow kind of recognition. His shoulders slumped. This can't be real. Call her, I said, my voice like ice. Ask her to move up your timeline. Tell her you want to leave this weekend instead of next month. See how quickly she pushes you away. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, dialing with fingers that barely obeyed. He put it on speaker. Dallas? Her voice floated through the line, sweet and silky. Victoria, he said, his voice raw, I need to see you tonight. I can't tonight, baby, she replied smoothly. I have a business dinner with a potential investor. What about tomorrow? His voice cracked. I think we should move up the plan. Let's leave this weekend. Silence on the line, long enough for the truth to settle. Then she spoke, her tone honeyed but firm. We've talked about this. We can't rush. Timing is everything. Trust me, Dallas, I'll call you tomorrow. The call ended. Dallas sat frozen, staring at the phone as though it had betrayed him. His face crumpled, tears sliding unchecked down his cheeks. She was with him, wasn't she? He whispered. Thursday nights are her regular date with Richard, I said. You've never been special to her. You were just convenient. He collapsed against the couch, sobs breaking free. For a moment, I almost pitied him, the man I had once loved reduced to this shaking, broken figure. But pity was dangerous. Pity softened the edge I needed to keep. When his crying slowed, he looked up at me with eyes hollowed by ruin. What do you want from me, Wendy? I already told you, I said coldly. Prison or Costa Rica. Confess or run. Either way, you're gone. Our marriage is finished. His lips parted, but no words came. I stood, grabbed my bag, and walked toward the door. His voice followed me, cracked and desperate. Wendy, wait, please. I loved you. I turned back, my hand on the knob. No, I said softly. You loved yourself. And she was just another reflection. Then I left him there, surrounded by the wreckage of his own lies, with nothing but two choices, both of which meant losing me forever. The next morning, the house was still. Dallas hadn't come to bed. I found him asleep on the couch, a blanket tangled around his legs, the manila envelope of photographs still scattered across the coffee table like a deck of cursed cards. His face was swollen from crying, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. For a moment I stood there, studying him. The man who had once been my anchor now looked like driftwood, useless, broken, carried by a tide he could no longer control. I turned away, grabbed my keys, and left. There were bigger battles to fight. By noon, I was seated at a small coffee shop downtown, a corner table chosen carefully so I could watch the door. I stirred my cappuccino with deliberate calm, though inside my pulse was thrumming like a live wire. A shadow fell across the table, and when I looked up, Richard Hawthorne was standing there. Up close, he was every bit the man I expected. Late 50s, hair silvered at the temples, suit cut to perfection, posture honed by years of power, but his eyes, sharp and assessing, gave him away. He wasn't just wealthy, he was dangerous in his own right. "Mrs. Vale," he said, his voice clipped, controlled, "I hope this is worth my time." "It will be," I replied, gesturing to the seat across from me. "And please, call me Wendy." He sat, folding his hands on the table, a picture of restrained impatience. "You called my personal cell phone. You threatened to expose me to my wife. So tell me, what is it you really want?" I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the photos I'd taken of Victoria and him together, paired neatly with copies of her financial ties to Dallas. His jaw tightened as he flipped through them. "She's been with your husband," he muttered. His voice was calm, but the vein in his temple throbbed. "For months," I said softly. "And she's been bleeding him dry the entire time. Embezzled funds, offshore accounts, Costa Rica. Ringing any bells?" Richard's lips pressed into a line. He turned one of the photos over, staring at it for a long moment before setting it down. "She told me he was just a client." I almost laughed. "She tells everyone they're special. You're not the first man she's used, Richard, and you won't be the last, unless we stop her." He leaned back, studying me. "And why should I trust you?" "Because you and I want the same thing," I said. "To see her stripped of power, to see her pay for the lies she's spun around us. You want justice for your wallet, your pride. I want justice for my marriage, my life. She played us both. That makes us allies." For a long moment, silence stretched between us. The noise of the cafe swirled around. Espresso machines hissing, spoons clinking against mugs, conversations humming. But at our table, time felt suspended. Finally, Richard gave a sharp exhale, like he'd made peace with something ugly. "What's your plan?" he asked. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "We let her believe she still has control. You dangle more money. You make her think you're ready to leave your wife, to give her everything she's been working for. Meanwhile, I make sure Dallas discovers the truth about her double life. When the two of you collide, she'll have nowhere to run." Richard's eyes narrowed, skeptical but intrigued. "And then?" "Then," I said, my words slow and deliberate, "we crush her, together." He studied me for another long moment, then a small, humorless smile tugged at his lips. "You're colder than you look, Mrs. Vale." "I've had to be," I replied. We spent the next hour drawing outlines on napkins, whispering over half-finished drinks. Richard would play his part, feeding Victoria promises and bait. I would plant seeds for Dallas to stumble over, ensuring he saw her betrayal with his own eyes. The goal was simple: isolate her, expose her, strip away every mask until nothing was left but the truth. When Richard finally rose to leave, he offered his hand. I shook it, his grip firm, his expression still guarded. "If this goes wrong," he warned, "I won't protect you." I met his gaze without flinching. "I don't need protection. I need results." As he walked away, I finished the last sip of my cappuccino, now lukewarm and bitter. My reflection in the window showed a woman I barely recognized, eyes sharp, mouth set, a predator waiting for the right moment to pounce. I wasn't the victim anymore, I was the hunter, and Victoria Blake had no idea the trap was already closing around her. Saturday afternoon, the boutique's display window glared back at me like an invitation and a warning. The golden letters Blake's glittered in the late sunlight, promising luxury, hiding rot. I pushed open the door, and the bell above it chimed a brittle note. Victoria Blake stood behind the counter, arranging silk scarves into careless elegance. She looked up, her smile automatic, poised for another customer. But when her eyes met mine, something faltered. Maybe she recognized me from the hospital photos Dallas kept on his desk. Or maybe she simply knew, instinctively, that I wasn't there to shop. "Good afternoon," she said. Her voice was honey, but her hands stilled on the scarves. "Close the store," I said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice to something sharp enough to cut. "Turn the sign, lock the door, we're going to talk." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, but she obeyed. The closed sign flipped, the lock clicked, and the boutique suddenly felt smaller, air thick with perfume and tension. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the velvet chair by the fitting rooms. She perched on the edge, stiff as a porcelain doll about to crack. "How long have you been sleeping with my husband?" I asked. Her lips parted, then closed again. Finally, she whispered, 8 months. I nodded slowly, though the confirmation still sliced deep. "And how long have you been taking his money?" Her eyes darted away. "I didn't ask for it. He offered to help with the business." "Don't lie to me," my voice echoed in the empty boutique. 6 months, yes? Tears welled, smudging the perfect lines of her eyeliner. She nodded once. "And Richard Hawthorne?" I asked, sliding a photograph from my purse and dropping it onto the table beside her. Her and Richard at the cafe, his hand over hers. Her face crumpled. "How do you know about Richard?" "I know everything," I said coldly. "Your real name is Victoria Chin. 3 arrests for fraud and identity theft. You're not a businesswoman. You're a con artist." Her breath hitched, and mascara streaked down her cheeks. "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that," I snapped. "You bleed men dry, one after the other, moving on when the carcass is empty. Dallas wasn't your first, and he won't be your last, unless I stop you." She shook her head, trembling. "Please, you don't understand. I didn't know he was stealing from clients. You thought you could live off his money until you found a bigger fish. You thought you could juggle him and Richard without either of them finding out. But you miscalculated." I leaned in close, so close I could smell the expensive perfume still clinging to her skin. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay back every penny you took from Dallas and Richard. All of it. And then you're going to disappear." Her eyes widened. "Disappear?" "Yes. Close the boutique. Leave town. Erase yourself. If I ever see you again, if you so much as send a text to Dallas or Richard, I will destroy you." She shook her head wildly, strands of auburn hair sticking to her damp cheeks. "I can't just vanish. I have a lease, employees, customers." "You should have thought of that before you built your empire on lies," I said. From my purse, I pulled a thick manila envelope and placed it on the table. "Inside are copies of your criminal record, bank statements linking you to Dallas's embezzlement, photos of you with both men, recordings of your conversations. I also have the phone numbers of Richard's wife, Dallas's clients, and the state attorney general's office. One call from me, and your life is over." Her shaking hand hovered over the envelope, but didn't touch it. She looked up at me, broken, her eyes glistening. "What do you want from me?" "I already told you," I said. "Disappear." Her breath came fast and shallow. "And if I don't?" "Then," I said, standing tall, "you'll wish prison was your only problem." I turned and walked toward the door. "Wait!" she called after me, her voice cracking. "Even if I wanted to pay back the money, I don't have it. The boutique barely breaks even. Richard's wife watches his accounts like a hawk. I can't—" "That," I said, pausing with my hand on the lock, "sounds like your problem." I opened the door, the bell chiming again as I stepped into the fading sunlight. Behind me, I could hear her sobbing, muffled and desperate. On the sidewalk, the evening air filled my lungs. For the first time since I'd come home from the hospital, I felt like I could breathe. Victoria Blake thought she was the predator. She thought she could take what she wanted, move pieces across her board, and never be caught. But she had just met the hunter who had studied her every move. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a desperate call. Her voice was brittle, cracking under the weight of panic. "Wendy, please, I need more time," Victoria whispered, as if the walls around her might be listening. 72 hours isn't enough. I can't liquidate everything that fast." I held the phone away for a moment, staring at her name on the screen. Victoria Blake, the alias she had built her little kingdom upon. When I put the phone back to my ear, my voice was steady, cold. "You've had months to plan an escape with my husband. You can figure out how to disappear in 3 days." Her breath hitched. "I'll lose everything. The boutique, my apartment, my car." "You mean you'll lose everything you bought with stolen money?" I cut in. "And that's not loss, Victoria. That's justice." A sob cracked through the line. "There has to be another way, please. Maybe a payment plan or something." "The only plan I care about," I said, "is the one where you're gone." I hung up before she could reply, the dial tone humming like satisfaction. But even as I set the phone down, I knew this wasn't enough. She would fight. She would scheme. Con artists don't stop conning. They adapt. And if I wanted to finish this, I had to pull the ground out from under her entirely. That evening, I scrolled through the photos and documents on my laptop, Richard with his hand curled around hers, financial transfers from Dallas's clients to shell companies, copies of her criminal record under the name Victoria Chin. Enough evidence to bury her a dozen times over. And yet I wanted more than evidence. I wanted inevitability. So I dialed a number I had looked up the night before, Detective Lisa Rodriguez, Financial Crimes Unit. Her reputation was clear in every news article I'd read. Relentless, smart, and incorruptible. She answered on the third ring, her tone brisk. Rodriguez. Detective, my name is Wendy Vale. My husband was the advisor arrested for embezzlement last week. Dallas Vale. There was a pause, a soft shift in her voice. Yes, I remember. What can I do for you, Mrs. Vale? I have information about someone tied to his crimes, I said. A woman named Victoria Blake, or legally, Victoria Chin. I laid out enough to hook her. Victoria's boutique, her relationship with Dallas, her history of fraud. I didn't mention Richard. That was my secret weapon. But I painted Victoria as a co-conspirator, one already planning her next escape. Detective Rodriguez's voice sharpened. Do you have documentation? Plenty, I said, and I believe she'll try to flee within the next 2 days. We'll look into it, she promised. Thank you for bringing this forward. I hung up, my hand trembling slightly with the rush of power. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was orchestrating. The next morning, I parked across the street from the boutique. A bright store closing sale banner hung in the window, letters screaming desperation. Inside, Victoria moved frantically, marking down prices, stuffing merchandise into boxes. She was unraveling, exactly as I intended. At noon, a sleek Mercedes pulled up. Richard Hawthorne stepped out, his suit immaculate, his face unreadable. He entered the boutique, and through the glass I watched their exchange. Victoria's hands fluttered, her body angled toward him in pleading desperation. Richard stood still, calm, a man in control of the narrative. When he finally left, she collapsed against the counter, her shoulders shaking. She didn't see me across the street, sipping coffee like an audience member watching the last act of a play. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Her voice was raw now, shredded by panic. Wendy, it's Victoria. We need to talk. I told you, I said, you have 1 day left. She rushed the words, tripping over them. I spoke with Richard today. He said, you and you've been working together. He told me everything. About your investigation, about your plan to destroy me. I didn't answer. Let her fill the silence. And I want to make a deal, she said. There's more money. Money neither Dallas nor Richard knew about. I've been running smaller cons, building a reserve, $200,000, hidden away. That caught me off guard, though I didn't let it reach my voice. And what exactly are you offering? All of it, she whispered. Every cent. If you'll call off your investigation, if you'll let me disappear quietly. I closed my eyes, imagining the faces of Dallas's clients, the elderly woman who trusted him with her life savings, the families who believed he was guiding them toward security. $200,000 could heal a lot of wounds, but money wasn't the only currency I craved. No deal, I said. You don't get to buy your freedom. Wendy, please. You destroyed my marriage, I said, my voice ice. You helped Dallas steal from people who trusted him. You've conned your way through life, leaving wreckage in your wake, and now you're going to pay for it, all of it. What does that mean? She demanded, voice rising. It means you better get a good lawyer, I said, and hung up. Immediately, I redialed Detective Rodriguez. Detective, it's Wendy Vale again. Victoria Chin just confessed to me about multiple scams, and she admitted she's hiding money in safety deposit boxes and offshore accounts. Rodriguez's voice was tight, urgent. Thank you, Mrs. Vale. That's extremely helpful. We'll move quickly. The next morning, I sat in my car across from Victoria's apartment building, a newspaper open on my lap as camouflage. At exactly 9, 3 unmarked police cars pulled up. Detectives and uniformed officers streamed inside. 20 minutes later, they emerged with Victoria in handcuffs. Her auburn hair was a mess, her perfect makeup smeared. She twisted against their grip, her voice sharp but muffled by the glass. And then her eyes locked on mine, across the street. For a fleeting moment, recognition flared, then betrayal, then fury. I lifted my coffee cup in a small salute, my smile sharp as a blade. She had thought she was the predator, but predators fall hardest when they mistake the prey for something weak. The news broke by evening. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea, while the television screen lit the room in cold blue. Local boutique owner arrested in fraud scheme. There she was, Victoria Blake, or rather, Victoria Chin, led into a police station in handcuffs, her face pale and tight, makeup streaked in lines of humiliation. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions she didn't answer. The anchor explained that she was facing multiple charges: fraud, identity theft, money laundering. The camera cut to boxes of seized merchandise being carried out of Blake's boutique. Silk dresses and handbags, once symbols of her power, now looked like evidence piled on the curb. I turned the volume down, savoring the silence between each image. For months she had strutted through my life like a queen. Now, stripped of her crown, she was nothing more than another criminal, caught and caged. But this wasn't just about her. Dallas's arrest had already hit the papers earlier in the week. His mugshot, green eyes dulled, hair disheveled, had been plastered across headlines. Financial advisor arrested for embezzling nearly $500,000. He was sitting in a county cell awaiting arraignment. His phone calls came through my line, unanswered. Letters began arriving, his handwriting still neat, his words pleading. I stacked them in a drawer, unopened. Whatever explanations he offered, they couldn't matter. He had chosen his path. The consequences were beginning to ripple outward. Clients called me, some furious, some broken, their voices cracking as they asked if it was true. The Johnsons, who had trusted Dallas with their retirement. Megan Miller, the grandmother who baked cookies for us every Christmas. Each name he had betrayed was carved into me like a tally. And though restitution was coming, thanks to the funds seized from Victoria and the assets frozen in Dallas's accounts, money couldn't stitch trust back together. I met with my lawyer that week. Papers stretched across his mahogany desk, the ink black and final. "Your divorce will be straightforward," he said. "Given the circumstances, the judge will expedite it. You'll keep your share of the house sale, plus what remains after restitution." "How much?" I asked, though I already knew the answer didn't matter as much as the principle. "Roughly $200,000. He leaned forward. "That's a clean start, Wendy. Not everyone in your position is so fortunate." Fortunate. The word felt strange, almost mocking. But he was right. I could leave. I could rebuild. That night, I walked through the house one last time. Our wedding photo still hung on the hallway wall. Dallas in his crisp suit, me in my gown, both of us grinning with the blind certainty of youth. I reached up, pulled it down, and pressed it against my chest for a moment. My reflection in the glass stared back at me, older now, harder, wiser. Then I carried it to the trash and dropped it in. Cynthia arrived with boxes the next morning. "Seattle?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as we packed books into cardboard. "Seattle," I confirmed. "New job, new city, new name if I have to." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You're stronger than I ever imagined, Wendy." I looked around the house, every corner echoing with memories I no longer trusted. I didn't have a choice. 2 weeks later, I stood in my new apartment in Seattle, the skyline glittering beyond the window. Mountains crouched like sentinels in the distance. The air smelled of rain and opportunity. My lawyer had wired the settlement money into a fresh account, half of it earmarked for a trust fund to help Dallas's victims, the other half mine to build a future. I poured a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. Below, the city pulsed with energy. I could vanish into it, rebuild myself into whoever I chose to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Cynthia. "Saw the news. Victoria got 12 years. You must feel relieved." Relieved wasn't the word. Vindicated, maybe. Or simply finished. Both Dallas and Victoria had been swept off the board. Their schemes collapsed. Richard, too, had slunk back into his marriage, a man who would forever fear exposure. I had cut the strings of every puppet in this twisted play. And yet, as I sipped my wine, I felt a tug in my chest, a hollowness where love used to be, where trust used to grow. I'd won, but victory had left me scarred. Inside, a box still sat unopened. Letters from Dallas. Pleas, apologies, declarations of love scrawled in ink I refused to read. One day, maybe, I would burn them. For now, it was enough that they remained unopened, his words trapped in silence. The city stretched out before me, a clean slate. My life, finally my own, was waiting. And though part of me still trembled from the wreckage, another part sharpened, steady and unflinching. Because I knew now, betrayal doesn't just break you, it remakes you. Seattle welcomed me with rain, the kind that softened edges and blurred lights until the city looked like a watercolor. My new apartment sat high above the streets, its balcony overlooking Elliott Bay, where ferries cut slow lines through gray water. At night, I'd step outside with a glass of wine and let the damp wind thread through my hair, whispering promises of a clean slate. For weeks, I pretended to believe in that slate. I unpacked carefully, arranging dishes in new cabinets, stacking books on unfamiliar shelves, learning the rhythm of a neighborhood where no one knew my name. I told myself I was done with betrayal, with revenge, with the bitter taste of secrets. But the past has a way of knocking. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned molten gold, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello? Is this Wendy Vale?" a woman's voice asked, firm but not unkind. "Yes, who's calling?" "Detective Sarah Kim, Seattle Police Department. I'm reaching out because we have a case you might find relevant." A chill swept over me. Relevant how? "We're investigating a series of financial frauds. The suspect has been targeting married men, gaining their trust, siphoning money, vanishing before they realize the extent of the loss. The methods are sophisticated but familiar. Word reached us that you were instrumental in exposing a similar case back in your hometown." My grip tightened around the phone. "What's the suspect's name?" "We're not entirely certain. She's used multiple identities. One of them..." Detective Kim paused. "Is Victoria Blake." For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. The name rang in my ears like a gunshot, dragging me back to that boutique, to the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of her laugh floating from my bedroom. "That's impossible," I whispered. "She's in prison." "Records show she served time under another alias years ago and vanished after her release. We think she may have been running multiple identities simultaneously. If she's in Seattle, she's already working her way into new lives." My pulse hammered. The past I thought I had buried was not just alive, it was hunting again. "When can we meet?" I asked, my voice steady now, sharpened by something I had thought I left behind. "Tonight, if you're willing. We need someone who knows how she operates, someone who's seen the web she spins." I glanced out at the city lights flickering awake, reflections quivering across the bay. A clean slate, I had told myself. But some slates were never meant to stay clean. "Send me the address," I said. As I slipped on my coat and grabbed my keys, I caught sight of the old bracelet still lying in the bottom of a drawer, silver dulled, but stone intact. Dallas's gift. A reminder that betrayal isn't a wound, it's a weapon, if you choose to wield it. I locked the door behind me and stepped into the Seattle night, the air heavy with rain and possibility. Some people never change. They just find new cities, new victims, new names. But they'd made one mistake. They had come to my city. And I was very, very good at hunting hunters.